engaging with folks in the criminal justice system. And for many of us, unless we personally or our family have been touched by the criminal justice system, it can be really easy to be unaware of the ways in which these problems of injustice, of mass incarceration have really exploded in our country in recent decades, and the negative effects that it can have in individuals and families and communities. And I just wanted to share, my first encounter with incarcerated people was as a hospital chaplain. By the way, another category of the other I just thought of yesterday was the sick. I have found lots of people in circumstances outside of the church that are really seeking in hospitals. But anyway, in my beginning training, I was in a large county hospital in Los Angeles where the basement was actually a satellite of the county jail where sick inmates were treated. And walking through those high security gates and into those patient rooms with armed guards was certainly an unnerving experience. But getting to know some of those folks who the world often forgets had left a powerful impression on me, people who are in need of love and care and community. Later on in Elkhart, Indiana, I became involved in a ministry doing Bible studies, classes in jails, and met lots of really amazing women and helped develop supportive relationships for them that continued as some of them were released and trying to rebuild their lives. So it was because of those relationships that I became really interested in some of these issues. It was during that time that I read Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, which I recommend if you've not heard of that one, and began to learn about some of these problems in our criminal justice system, and became sort of engrossed in this issue from a justice perspective, watching documentaries and reading more and more. I read Rethinking Incarceration, as Dr. Scott recommended. And so just to learn how we as Christians can support efforts to implement these much needed reforms to create justice that is equal and restorative and not just punitive. This is one of those issues that intersects so many things that we care about: race, poverty, marginalization, and more. So I hope we'll be ready to learn from our experts. I was going to introduce them. Marvin is here, but our third panelist is not here yet. Should I go ahead and introduce Marvin?
Yeah.
He'll be right back. He just had to make a pit stop. Marvin Stepherson is a lifelong servant leader with careers in military law enforcement and education. He is currently on the faculty at Roberts Wesleyan College in the criminal justice program. He is a retired police sergeant with 25 years experience in law enforcement and also a veteran of 27 years in the U.S. Marine Corps. He has produced a documentary film called Too Blue to Be Black, Too Black to Be Blue, which explores policing from an African-American perspective. And he's also currently a candidate for the Monroe County legislature, which is our local Rochester. So come on up and join our panel, Marvin. And Jason, I don't know if you really introduced yourself. Jason, in case you don't know, is a member of the Edgewood Free Methodist Church. He also attended Roberts Wesleyan College in Criminal Justice, went on to get his PhD at University of Albany, and he has been on the faculty of Rochester Institute of Technology in the Criminal Justice Department since 2005. So he's a great resource for us. And should I wait till Shani gets here to introduce her?
She's on her way. Yeah, let's get started.
Okay, let's get started. All right, so I'm just going to start with these first couple questions that we talked about. So criminal justice reform has sort of reached a buzzword status among a broad base of journalists and politicians and officials and academics. When you're speaking to individuals who may be unfamiliar with the concept of criminal justice reform, how do you introduce them to the need for change and what change can look like?
You want to get started?
I didn't know if I was going to need a mic or not.
I don't know.
Sometimes the Marine Corps and you start projecting, you scream, and everybody's holding their ears so you know the mic's too close. So first of all, thank you for the introduction. I spent 25 years in law enforcement and worked in this particular area here for a number of years, and I finished here as a supervisor for the bar district. So I spent a lot of time in your parking lot and up along this area here with the patrons who should have been in here. But we made sure they cleaned your lot up. Reform for me, again, thinking over the years as I patrolled and going back to school was a major part, I think, in reflection. When you're working in that type of career or occupation, many of us here are human beings and we are creatures, what we call of habit. And so when you put yourself into a community, you kind of isolate yourself from other communities because you start to groupthink, much like our churches. James Baldwin said the most segregated hour of the day is high noon on Sunday because we gravitate to what makes us comfortable and we talk the same language, and so it's a lot easier when we understand and we empathize with one another's experiences and journeys. So talking about reform, when you say that to law enforcement inside the community, many times for them it's a matter of what are they going to do as opposed to what are we going to do. We're not broken. We're trying to help you out. And so we don't see ourselves as being sick. I remember watching Roots and a comedian took a joke from Roots many years ago, and he was saying that, the slave would say to the master, "Boss, we's sick." That the slave would see the slave masters being ill and then took the illness upon themselves. So many times we in law enforcement don't see that we have a sickness. We see other people having a sickness and we try to project that off. So now when you talk about reform, that's equality. That's fixing a broken system. And for those inside, you see that as not something that's equality, but it's oppression. Why are you trying to stop me from doing my work? I'm going about my work. I'm doing the job. You hear that term used all. I'm doing the job all the time. So reform, one, has to start with education. This particular presentation would be excellent in the police academy as well as part of in-service because officers are very educated, especially the new ones these days. A lot of the older ones, they didn't take up to going back to school or looking outside of their own perspective. But for me, when I went back to school, it opened up my understanding by reading and observing more critically about my community, about my actions, and about things around law enforcement and how we do that job. And so education, telling it from the truth. We talk about our history in the U.S. The American police community did not start out with a serve, protect mission. It was slave patrols. And so the mission was about keeping that oppression going because it was all driven by social economics. We're talking about sugar, we're talking about tobacco, rice, cotton, all those things that kept this country above other countries economically. And when that was threatened with the abolishment of slavery, there had to be another means to get that workforce back into a subservient role without it going back to the role which we knew it was not going to because of laws that were put in place. So education, and then policy, addressing policies. Certainly you gotta close the loopholes that allow people to maneuver around certain things because if you fear for your life, how do you measure that? How do you put a frame on that? And so we gotta find a way to do things more responsibly, case by case. I don't believe there's a broad stroke on reform, and I don't believe it's monolithic. So you got to address from several different aspects and capacities. Hopefully I didn't talk too long and that answer some of the questions.
You can never talk too long. I mean, one thing that I think of in terms of the promise of criminal justice reform is not just looking forward. I mean, you can put body-worn cameras on police officers, but there is a real need to look backward and look at some of the history and the damage and the harm that has been caused, acknowledge it, sit with it, because I don't think you can have progress until you acknowledge some of that damage. That might be long-term. That might take a while, and there's some, I think, an important balance between short-term things that we can do in the immediate future, and then some things that might take a little bit more heavy lifting, emotionally and time-wise.
All right, well, to get a little more specific, if you had to select one or two of the most pressing problems or issues facing the criminal justice system and the individuals and communities impacted by the system, what would those be and why?
It's a loaded question. It's an excellent question. It really is. So for me, from an inside looking out, would dispel the myth that hiring more minorities is going to address the issue. Because again, it's a culture. And when you hire what we consider minorities, which again, I don't see anything minor about people of color, females being brought into the occupation, we're all human beings and of equal standing. The number of individuals that you hire to supposedly address the issue, they have to have the support base in order to be able to stand against a system that has been in place for hundreds of years. And so that culture is reinforced by legacy. You mean grandfather, father, uncle, aunt, folk that have, again, talked about life as Blue Bloods, for example. Okay? You see the show Blue Bloods, and my wife loves this show. And I go, I said, I can't really watch it because it shows an all-white family, DA lawyer, father is the commissioner, grandfather was the commissioner, you know the roles. I read how they, and so they pass around that dinner table their philosophy, their perspective of what policing is. And then they go out and they do it generationally. So if it's a negative perspective, if it's a wrong type of philosophy, they're passing that by legacy to legacy, and then you hire someone to come in who's probably the lone representative of their family and their community to now fight against that legacy. And if they have friends who also identify with that, you can see how that whole thing again gets bigger, and now you're by yourself inside a community that you're expected to go out and police. And I've been on that when I did the film, again, Too Blue to Be Black, Too Black to Be Blue. I've taken calls that were violent calls, and the radio was silent because there was nobody coming to back me because of the position I had taken on the department. And all I had taken was that you have a obligation to protect and serve people that you look down upon, and you need to change that mindset. I came from the community that you talk about. I grew up Joseph Avenue. I was an old Baton Street kid. So the area that I policed in was the area I played in as a kid. I have fond memories of that area. But you have people that come in and say negative things about that area, and then when you correct them, now all of a sudden you become the outside. And so it's hard to fight against that culture. So it comes to addressing the legacy and changing that culture and giving those who come in there that you want to be the change agents, you got to give them that support. Otherwise, they're just there and they're going to assimilate because it's easier to go with the flow than it is to go against it.
Thank you, Marvin. Let me introduce our third panelist, Shani Mitchell, correct? She is a native Rochesterian. She's a prosecutor with over 13 years experience, both in Atlanta and here in Monroe County. Also teaching at SUNY Canton, and She is a candidate for the office of Monroe County District Attorney. So, yeah. So, we have been asking a few questions. I'll ask you the last question that we were just discussing was, if you had to select one or two of the most pressing problems or issues, I'm sure you've answered this many times, right? Facing the criminal justice system and the individuals and communities impacted, what would those be and why?
And I have to apologize. This campaign has, of course, as you would guess, has taken over my life, right? And you know that, but you don't know that when you decide to mount such a historic run for office and for a criminal justice system that you've been a part of for most of your adult life and for something that you absolutely love with all of its flaws. So I apologize to you for arriving here late today. Thank you. Thank you so much. There are a number of issues within the criminal justice system, and listening to Marvin talk, for anyone who tells you that race does not play a role in the disposition of cases is not being honest with themselves. It does. It does influence our decision making. It does influence how we dispose of cases. One thing that I loved when I have these opportunities is for me to educate everyone on the power that the district attorney has. And I'm not really sure people understand the type of power a district attorney has. So after Marvin makes an arrest, I then am responsible for reviewing the case to make sure that it's legally sufficient, that Marvin has done everything he's supposed to do as it relates to the laws of New York State, the Constitution of New York State, as well as the United States Constitution. If I find that Marvin has not, I can then dismiss the case without having to go to a judge. I can withdraw and dismiss the charges against an individual. Most people don't understand that. So I believe that implicit bias is part of our criminal justice system and has been and continues to live and breed with it. So we have to do some relearning, re-educating of ourselves as prosecutors. Not only about the biases that we have and how it creeps in when we dispose of cases, but it's also that our job is to ensure that justice applies to everyone. And it's not that. Most people also believe that the prosecutor's job is just to that. We are just to prosecute and we are to send you away and dispose of our cases. We say we got a plea, we obtained a conviction, and now we move on. That's not our job. Our job is to ensure that we protect the rights of all. And we ensure that we have found a proper balance in disposition of cases. And if that means that we are figuring out and helping the individual who's been arrested figure out what are the issues that cause me to offend, that is still part of us, because we are not safe when we just say, oh, I'm gonna give you 30 days in jail and then you keep going. Because all you do is you still have this broken individual who's gonna do what? Reoffend. And it may increase the next time. We have people who are, and most of the time we find that, we know this, people commit crimes because of what? Lack of resources, right? I'll give you something very simple. I used to be a head of the auto theft task force in the DA's office here in Monroe County. And if you create a fake inspection sticker or certificate, that's a felony. How many knew that? Right, very few. So if you
have 100 of them, it's 100 felonies.
Absolutely, right. So if you do that, but I found this individual, his case landed on my desk. But why would one do that? because they couldn't afford to get the car fixed so it can be inspected. But he still needs to drive the car to do what? Go to work. So these are basic things, but he still found himself with a felony case. So most of the time people are committing crimes because of what? Lack of resources. They also may have drug addiction, undiagnosed mental health issues. Todd Baxter will tell you, and I say it wherever I go, that on any given day, there are over half of the jail population of those who have mental health issues. We have mental health court where we can refer a case to mental health court for assistance, but you have to have a felony. So what happened to those with misdemeanors? We have to figure it out. So the main issues I would say is dealing with our implicit bias and also realizing that our job is bigger than just getting a conviction and sending them back out on the street. We have to address the entire offender so we don't create this revolving door, because we're not any safer because we have a conviction. We're not tougher on crime. That's not the answer to safety. Safety is bigger than that. And that's what the job of the district attorney is. And we have to understand that, but the current administration doesn't see it as that.
Personally, I'm very glad to meet you. I learned in my research about the power that the prosecutor has and the district attorney. In this small town that I lived in Indiana, there happened to be an election taking place for the county prosecutor. And I went to the debates, and I figured out which one I thought was reform-minded and which one was punitive-minded, and I campaigned for her. And I think, that's just something that we can all be aware of. Like, there are so many issues that we all care about, and I know this is maybe seems like just one other one, and how am I going to do anything? But this, as citizens, is something that we can be aware of, that how much power this position really holds, and we can have an influence in that among our own community. So thank you. In fact, I'm going to ask you another question. So when it comes to court reforms, what are courts currently doing that you think they need to stop doing, or what are they not doing that they need to start doing more of?
I think that there are a number of reformatory programs, if you want to say, through the court system. So we have drug court, we have mental health court, we have veterans court, we now have a new opioid court. Now with the new opioid court, we've taken a different look at it because of the drug, the opioid drug. We are now not forcing individuals to resolve their cases. We're trying to get them in treatment first. We'll deal with your case later. So as opposed to the traditional drug court, you have a contract that you have to sign, then we'll work on your treatment. You have to take a plea first. Let me start with that. You take a plea to the charge. You do a contract that sets out all the parameters of the drug court system, drug court program. We work on setting up a program for you, set you up with a case manager, set out the expectations, and then you move forward. I like the opioid court system better because you're not taking a plea to anything first. We're going to determine how. First, we want to get you treatment. Treatment is the first goal. The problem with drug court, and I love drug court. Listen, I was a drug court prosecutor. I was a mental health prosecutor. I believe in rehabilitation. I believe in it wholeheartedly. But I believe that, and let me just say that all of them, you have to have something to incentivize individuals, right? You have to have some type of accountability as well. But I'm not sure of taking the plea to the charge, because what can happen is, what they say is, if you take the plea in the beginning, what happens afterwards, if you do well, then your case can be reduced or dismissed. Dismissed is rarely ever happens, but you will get a reduced one. But with the opioid court, you're not even taking a plea at all until after we figure things out, and you may never even take a plea and your case is dismissed. So it's two different manners in which we're handling drug addiction currently. And we get it because opioid is a different drug than cocaine and other ones. However, we should be treating it on the criminal justice side the same. So that's what I believe we should be doing differently as it relates to our treatment courts. And those are through the court system. They are not specific to the district attorney's office. So I need to make that clear. So that's one thing that we can do different, and I believe we can figure it out. We were smart enough to put together. We are smart enough to fix that. We need diversity in our court, on our benches. Here in Monroe County, I practice first in Atlanta, Georgia, in Fulton County, and when I tell you there's a stark difference between my home of Monroe County and Atlanta, of course it is. However, we can do better, and it makes a difference. It does. But when individuals come in and they don't see anyone that looks like themselves, it's not representative of the entire county of Monroe. So we can do better at that as well. As it relates to sentencing, I do believe that we can be very heavy-handed at sentencing, and we need to look at cases individually, take victims into account, absolutely, but it should definitely be proportionate. Sentencing should be proportionate to the crime and the effects. Now, as an educator, I have to say, even though I'm a lawyer as well, but being an educator, when I teach my students, incapacitation is when we set people away from society. That's jails and prisons. And that means we believe they're going to do future crimes. That's incapacitation. We forget that and I'm not sure if many of us as prosecutors understand that. So we have to remember, when we want to send people to prison, we're saying, in jails, we're saying that you have done wrong, we need to take you away from society because we believe that you're going to do it again. So we need to be very cognizant. I'm not saying people don't need to go to prison, absolutely. I'm not saying people don't need to go to jail, not at all. My family is a victim. My sister was murdered in 2002 at the hands of her domestic partner in front of her children. I know what it's like, and he's serving 25 to life. I was at the trial every day. I spoke at the victim impact statement. I know what it's like. And I believe that there are many people who need to be removed from society. But we just have to be very clear that that's the message we're sending, and we're sending it to the right people for the right period of time.
So I want to save some time for questions. If any of you have any, I'm going to ask one other question of maybe all three of you. So just for us as your audience, what suggestions do you have for us, people that do care about these issues, who are interested in learning more or promoting or advocating for reforms within the criminal justice system?
I would think, well, first of all, looking at the table of literature out there, that's a huge step. You know, a lot of what we read, I have the one book, White Fragility, excellent book. Re-educating ourselves about our world, being more inclusive. I think, like I said, I concur with Shani, retiring from the military and from the police department and going into teaching. I found that our system of educating our children, and as well as our parents and the rest of our community, we were so just fixed on one narrative. And when you exclude the other narratives, again, you're getting that half of the picture. And so then you operate off of half of that picture by being more inclusive and understanding the plight of all, when we say community coming together, knowing the journey of an African-American male, or that of a African-American female, Asian, Native American. I mean, just to look at that other person's lens and see them through their lens, it will drive you to be more convicted in how you make decisions when you pull that lever to vote for someone because of their value statement. when you go into the area to shop, or when you even come in to worship. Again, to want to sit next to somebody that looks different than you, but you all lift up your voices and hands praising the same Creator who made us all and made us all equally. So I thank you all for doing this. Thank you for inviting myself and the rest of us up here, because I think this is the big step right here.
I think that we all as citizens should demand more from the people that we elect. And regardless of what happens on November 5th, now that you are educated about the criminal justice system, make sure you require more of the people that hold these positions. There should be transparency. Make sure and ensure that those stats are being provided to you as to how cases are disposed, the manner in which they're disposed, the disparities. Are there any disparities? Require, ask, demand of every office. Soon to be we, elected officials, answer to you. So it is, we work for you. So you must demand those answers from us. Because when I talk all around the county, I say this is not a criminal justice system for the city of Rochester. This is Monroe County's criminal justice system. And it is reflective. What happens in that courthouse it reflects all of you. So you all need to understand we are in this together. So what happens if it comes out looking, smelling, is bad, that's reflective of us. So we have to demand more from our elected people to ensure that that type of justice, or whatever type of justice that you see coming out, is reflective of your values as well. Ask the questions. What does it mean? Oh, you got a conviction. Okay, what does it mean? What were the facts? What was going on? Demand more. Ask more. Seek the answers. Become involved. And require them to provide those answers to you. We are a community. And until we get back to that sense of community, we're going to be really in trouble.
Do you have an answer, Scott?
Let's
Jason.
take questions.
Okay. Anybody have any questions?
This is probably a loaded question. As a white pastor, I have many friends, church members, fellow pastors, who dispute what they hear in the press about black crime, especially and particularly regarding police officers killing black teenagers and mostly unarmed. And they say that, first of all, they said they would not be in trouble if they weren't doing something wrong. Secondly, they say that there's no such thing as police officers shooting unarmed people without cause. That obviously there was something that they were doing, otherwise there would have been no trouble. And so I find myself in a position of saying, I think there's much more to it. And the statistics that you shared with us earlier about the stop and frisk stuff and the arrest rate of minority people and whatnot is staggering. And you can't, obviously I don't think they can even account for that, and they don't. How would you say we should answer people like that? How do we, and I know I'm putting you on the spot.
I'll try to take a stab at it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's working. This one works.
I mean, sometimes when you look at data, right, and you're looking at numbers, it's hard to argue against that. So if they say, well, police wouldn't shoot unarmed citizens, well, let's look at it. Does it happen? And it does happen. The government does a terrible job of tracking this. The people that do a good job of tracking this are news media. The Guardian has a database called The Counted. The Washington Post has a database called oh. Well, you can lead a horse to water. You haven't? I don't know.
So,
These are white people who refuse to believe what black Christians are saying.
so again, we go back to the last question, challenging your comfort zone, that white fragility. We see law enforcement as white. I, as a supervisor, I retired as a sergeant. I'm standing at a crime scene. There are people, both white and black alike, who have come to my scene and said, I want to speak to a supervisor. Okay. And so I'm standing there, my blue uniform, all gold. All the officers are pointing, saying, he's the boss. But we have been conditioned, white and black alike, that white officer, especially that male white officer, is the boss. They're the ones that's leading. And so when they see me and then they realize, oh, you are the supervisor, it's a shock. And that narrative gets played out in TV, through shows, through the media, both in literature. It's always the hero. And so now you're challenging something as part of our fiber, our culture, our identity, saying that these individuals here had to have done something because we hold this law enforcement department, these officers, at a high esteem, that they're untouchable. Even though the video now is there. When I came on in '89, there was no video. But now you have cameras everywhere. And so when you look at this young kid on the playground playing with a gun, when we all grew up, we played on the playground with toy guns. But now they're a threat. And we don't give them an opportunity to respond to a challenge. We immediately shoot and say, well, they were holding a gun and I feared for my life. Then we take a young man who walks into a church, sits down and prays with the parishioners, and then gets up and begins to shoot everyone in sight, killing 9. And they take him to a restaurant on the way to a booking, and they don't kill him, and he's got the weapon on him. So now, it challenges your comfort. What is that dehumanization? What is that threat? And that's what I teach at Roberts for the ethnic and social diversity. We're talking about dehumanization. That which you fear, you create and make it a monster. So we talk about numbers. Darren Wilson, same size as Michael Brown. Height, weight. The officer is seated in the car, fears Michael Brown standing outside the car, and says he felt like he was the Hulk. He made this young man something that we all look at as a monster, because he wants you to buy into that narrative that when I fear for my life, why? Because I fought the Hulk. You don't see Mike Brown, you see the Hulk. We got to be careful with words. Words are powerful, right? And we know that from the scriptures. So when you spin a narrative and it gets played over and over again, and we've seen that with Tamir, we saw that with Mike Brown, we saw that with Trayvon, who was shot by a citizen, wasn't even a police officer, but that male white had the same positioning that of an officer. I had officers in the office who were fighting for him. I said, he's not even a cop. He's not even trained. You're giving him the benefit of the doubt. What about Trayvon? Stand your ground. He was being followed by a strange man into an apartment complex that he lived in. And we knew that area was full of pedophiles. This kid could have thought that he was being attacked by a pedophile. That never even came up as an argument. So that's what I say, when you go to address your parishioners, those that feel that way, you challenge their reasoning and say, okay, here's the picture. Take away the male white, take away the ethnicity, and say, here's the facts. This kid was playing on the playground with a toy gun. Have you ever played on the playground with a toy gun? The young man walking in Walmart with a toy gun and shot in Walmart. The young man walking alone in a dark environment in a residential neighborhood and followed by a strange male who then now starts to fight him, and he doesn't have the right to defend himself. We have to challenge our comfort zone. We have to look at things removing of the race because, again, we've attached the identity of law enforcement to one race, one ethnicity. And so it makes it difficult to believe and go against what you've been taught by your matriarch and patriarch as an honorable profession. Law enforcement is honorable, but not everybody that works in it is. And a lot of times they get automatic grandfather honorable because they wear the uniform, even though when we take the uniform off, they're dirty. We play in the dirt, we get dirty, we put clean clothes on. The clothes are clean, but the person wearing them is still dirty. And so that's what you got to do with your folk. You got to challenge and say, hey, look, I know you don't want to believe it, but the proof is right there. The numbers, the cameras. How do you explain away that? Not everybody is guilty.
But how do you explain shooting someone in the back who's running away in South Carolina? I don't know what else you can say to that. I mean, it's on video. He wasn't firing back. No one ever found a weapon. So I really don't understand. But I know that in most people's mind is, why would a police shoot anyone who's unarmed? But it's because of the fear that they have, and I talk about that implicit bias we have towards people of color. And it will manifest itself, and it will show up, and it will cause us to react. I don't know if people remember the movie Crash. It was so powerful. It was a great race, and there was a young man who fought for, in the end, it was Ryan Phillippe's character. In the end, he ended up killing a young man, but he was the one who was championing the races. But the fear, because the black man had his hand in his pocket, he ended up killing him. He was an officer, but it was just that fear. It's just automatically fear of the race of the person of color, and it just manifests itself and rears its ugly head because you just don't want to believe that a police would do it. I get it. We don't either. We don't want to believe it either, but unfortunately it happens.
Howard, you can't make sense to some people, but what I want to say as a pastor myself, and so I'm from Cincinnati, so we've had some significant, one about 15 years ago, we had to reform our whole police force, which we did a really good job of. And then one more recently that was on the university campus, which was not our regular police force. And in both of these cases, what was important for me as a pastor was we prayed about that on Sunday morning. We talked about it, we acknowledged it, we didn't just ignore that. So those of you in the room that are pastors, especially if it's in your city, but some of these other things that go on in the country, acknowledge that and pray about it. And then in our case, we had neither one of those were the police officers convicted, which, because it hardly ever happens. And then to acknowledge the pain of that. And, it doesn't help to argue with anybody about if the person should be convicted. You can have your own opinion about it. That's for the court to decide. But what we can acknowledge, like we said yesterday, if someone tells you they're offended, believe them. It's very painful for the black community when this happens, and white people don't acknowledge the pain they're feeling. And so we need to at least lament, we need to pray, we need to stand with them. And in my case, my husband and I have gone and, done marches and that kind of thing to show our support, gone to rallies and that sort of thing so that they knew that, we were standing with them. So I think it's really important to be an ally. Now, unfortunately, we need to stop this fantastic conversation. And I'm going to have Dorcas come up and pray for just the whole thing. But I personally, because of being in charge or convening this conference, just really want to appreciate both Jason, but also you two folks are public servants, and that you're here for us. So let's give them a really great hand.
Oh God, you are a God who loves justice and mercy. And yet we live in this broken world where we have to face very, very difficult situations each and every day in our communities. And we have a system that, that works well a lot of the time. And yet there are these places that are still broken and need fixing, need to come more in line with what justice truly is. And so I just want to thank you for these 3 servants who are serving their community and serving you by serving their community. Pray that you would protect each one of them, that you would empower each one of them, that you would give them strength and wisdom for the tasks before them. In Jesus' precious name I pray. Amen.
Amen.